started doing yoga at the gym,
Yes.
it was really kind of exercise. And as I started getting a little bit deeper into this work, I realized that it was way much more than exercise. And so now that yoga has exploded all over the world, why do you think it's so important that the modern yoga practitioners start at least experimenting, exploring all of these ancient texts like the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita? Why?
Well, they've reinvented the term yoga. So yoga has come to mean, in fact, modern scholars will call it modern postural yoga. So what most people are doing is modern postural yoga, and that's fine. If they're content with what their paradigms are, and they somehow feel some resistance or opposition to the actual yoga philosophy, because they have a connection with some other paradigm, if it's be it a religious paradigm, be it a scientific paradigm, that's fine. There's nothing in yoga which says, go and spread the word and impose it on everybody else, right? That maybe comes out of our more Abrahamic traditions, which this sort of aggression to go out and convert and impose. There's nothing like that in yoga. I would just say this for such people: even though the asana component is only a small component of what yoga really is. As a matter of fact, in the Yoga Sutras, there are 198 sutras. Only 3 of them out of 198 are dedicated to asana, posture, and actually 12 words, I think, out of 1,200, precisely 1% of the text is dedicated to asana. I would say this to people: if you got something out of asana, out of the postures, if it transformed your physical way of being, your alignment, your sense of feeling good in your body, if you got something out of that, and you have some faith in that, then consider the possibility, if that's only 1%, what else might there be? There's no need to jump it blindly, into some esoteric, just because it came from the East, just because it's written in Sanskrit. There's absolutely no reason for people to have faith in that. Why should they? Why should they suddenly have developed faith in some ancient tradition written in some strange language? But if they got something out of the first 1%, surely then that might then sort of create some space for the mind to consider, maybe let's see what else is being offered in this thing called yoga. Given that I've got so much out of the physical, the asana component, what does it have to say about the breath? What does it have to say about the mind? What does it have to say about consciousness? What does it have to say about embodiment? What does it have to say about the goal of life? These kinds of questions, which don't necessarily have to be, I guess they are religious questions, but spiritual questions. So I would hope that people that have gotten benefit out of the asana component would have some grounds to base their faith to maybe open up a little bit to some of the other dimensions and teachings of the tradition.
And you can still keep your religion and
Absolutely.
continue doing the postures. And
Absolutely.
There's really no conflict.
Well, at some point, you're going to have to decide what to do with Ishvara. There's Ishvara in the Yoga Sutras. If we're talking about the Yoga Sutras now.
If you choose to study the
Yoga
Sutras, you can
Sutras.
just stick to the postures.
If you just stick to the postures, then you're just doing a type 1%. And maybe not even 1% actually, because that 1% is plugged into a larger paradigm. So if you just extract that 1% and you're just doing that 1% in isolation, then you're not really connected at all to that larger paradigm. So then you need to find a new name for it, or then yoga just means something completely different.
So it could be exercise, and that's okay for whoever just needs that.
Well, even then, I would say, if that's the case, it's a more sattvic type of exercise. By sattvic, do I need to explain these terms? By sattvic, it's a more benevolent type of exercise. It's an exercise that's more benevolent for the body, even if we strip it of all of its real intention, its real intentionality, which is spiritual. If we strip it of all of that, it's still a benevolent way of keeping the body in good condition, the internal organs, the joints, the muscles, in a non-aggressive way, unlike other Western forms of exercise, which are very violent and aggressive to the body, and which you pay the price for later on in life. Yoga is something that's benevolent, and you can do, as one of the main teachers of yoga, Guruji Iyengar, was doing well into your 90s. You could be doing, how old was Guruji when he passed away?
95.
95. Still doing asanas till the very, very end. So even if you just want to strip that one bit and keep the name yoga, fine. It's still a benevolent way of keeping your body in shape.
So Edwin, what was your relationship with Guruji B.K.S. Iyengar?
Well, my own personal relationship with Iyengar is probably completely different with that of all of his disciples. Because for me, Iyengar is a Vaishnava. Vaishnavism is a devotional Vedanta tradition. And because of my own lineage is a Vaishnava lineage that is 90% the same as his. His lineage goes back to the 12th century, and the lineage that I took Diksha into is a 16th century tradition. But that 16th initiation. So that 16th century tradition is very much based on Iyengar's, the 12th century lineage of Iyengar's. There's some differences, but not major differences. So I always saw him as a Vaishnava, that he basically has the devotional aspect of his practice, which he didn't seem to share so much with his disciples in his books. Bhakti is there, but sort of reworked into a kind of a yoga with major focus on yoga asana. So I sort of saw him as a fellow Vaishnava, and therefore I always felt that a bond in that way. And I only had a chance to meet him once, and that was in the Harvard Faculty Club when Guruji's last tour. He'd had a last tour in the States, and again Patricia Walden, very graciously invited me to that, and so it was full. There was tons of people, and she is sitting next to him. And at a certain point, she calls me over, and there were three questions I always wanted to ask Guruji Iyengar, and I had been asking, and they had nothing to do with yogasana. They had to do with this other side of his pedigree, his spiritual genealogy. Let's call it his spiritual genealogy, which is his Vaishnava Vedanta genealogy, right? The Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, it's the name of the school, and the Sri Vaishnava is the lineage. So I always kept asking Patricia Walden to ask him three questions, and somehow or other it never happened. She was going backwards and forwards to India. So finally, there at the Harvard Faculty Club, I had the chance to ask him the questions myself. And these were the questions. The first of the question was, I said, Guruji, in the old pictures, we see you wearing the white sacred clay with the red marking, which is the sacred, this is the marking of that lineage that I've been referring to, Sri Vaishnava lineage, which is a Vedanta tradition, Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. I said, you wear those markings, do you identify with that lineage? Do you still feel like you belong to that? He said, yes. And that was just beautiful for me, because then I felt, okay, this sort of even deepened my sense of connection with him.
One question answered.
Yes, and then the second question was, in that lineage, Ishvara of Patanjali, that we find in Patanjali Yoga Sutra 1, 23 on to 26, and again in chapter 2 in Kriya Yoga, and in the Niyamas, Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to Ishvara, to God. In that lineage, the Sri Vaishnava lineage, Ishvara is Narayana. Do you identify with Narayana as Ishvara? He goes, yes. And I could see this kind of bhav. I could see this bhav because I could recognize it from my own practices and my own devotional culture that I'm used to. This bhav, as he said the name, yes, Narayana. You could see for that moment he thought of Narayana. And there was a bhav. There was a bhav. There was an emotional, spiritual connection there. And then I said, and the third question was, but those are my two main questions. And then the third question was just a personal one. I said, well, Guruji, I do a lot of teaching in your communities. Do you want me to teach your community that Vedantic interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Vishishta Advaita? It's Vishishta Advaita. It's not Advaita of Shankara. It's Vishishta Advaita. where there is a distinction between the soul and God, where God is a supreme being, Narayana, where the world is real. This is the philosophical contours of Vishishtadvaita. Do you want me to teach your community that? Because so much Advaita Vedanta has become prominent in the West. It's mostly Neo-Advaita, which has a lot to do with Hindu nationalism and factors we don't have time to get into now. But people think of Vedanta, in the West now, they think of this Neo-Vedanta. Whereas Vishishtadvaita is somewhat different from that. So I said, would you want me to teach that? And he said, yes, you should teach that, but you should also teach Advaita. You should teach it all. So it was a very beautiful answer. It was a non-sectarian. And then he said something like, there were many things I didn't teach them. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing, but I can't remember his precise words. But those were the words he said. There were many things I didn't teach. And that was my 5-minute little... But that's all I wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted. I wanted to make that connection, not on the asana level at all, because that's not my own spiritual background, is not asana based, although I love asana. It's bhakti based and Vedanta based, and I just wanted to see if that was still a living part of his spirituality. And just that, so I needed 4 minutes to make that connection and to realize, yeah, he's still a Sri Vaishnava, still identifies, Narayana is still his Ishtadevata, Narayana is Ishvara for him. He still recognizes he still identifies with the teachings of that school. And so that helps me when I teach to the community, to the Iyengar community, and do what he told me to do, which is, yes, teach Vishishtadvaita, but also teach them what Advaita is saying. So not to be sectarian. People get to make their choices, but let them know what the options are, and not just assume that there's only one mode of Vedanta, the non-dualist, monistic Advaita mode. But there are far more different ways of understanding the relationship between Atman and Brahman. And what is the nature of Brahman? Is it personal? Is it impersonal? These kinds of big questions, ontological questions. There are many variants, many different ways that Indian theologians and practitioners have engaged those questions.
I think you do that very well, because you pretty much open it up and you tell us, this is what it is, this is what's available, and then everyone is going to do like they do with a yoga practice. They're going to see what fits in with what speaks to them. And my experience in Guruji's presence was, he was always not only was he devoted to his students, he was devoted to his practice, he was still devoted to his late wife, even after she passed away. I mean, there was a big devotion, and he always, at least when I got to see him, there was always an element of devotion to God and exploring the divinity and really making a connection with the divinity within. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all just about the asana.
Right. Yes, no doubt. But I think, the way he articulated that to his Western disciples, because of the samskaras of the Western disciples, would have been one thing.
Yeah.
And his own personal practices, his puja practices in his room, in his house, would have been much more embedded in a traditional mode of devotion.
It's like what you're doing in your room and your spiritual practices is not necessarily what you're teaching us. You
Precisely.
have your own little thing.
Precisely.
I have my own practices of whatever that I do.
Sure.
That I don't show to anybody.
Sure.
Because it's like, not for public exposure. It's really between you and whatever speaks to you. Whether it's God or the divinity or Atman or Brahman or the universe, whatever it is.
Sure. But I also think that people of his generation, and going back to Krishnamacharya as well, in their encounters with Westerners, beginning in India and colonial India, it was much easier to have a conversation from an Advaita point of view than it was to have a conversation speaking about the forms of Ishvara, such as Narayana and Krishna and Rama and the goddess, which is really what Hindu bhakti is. So it's not so much, it's a personal thing, okay, and we keep it it's personal, we don't share it, but it's not so much that, it's not only that, it's also that generation of Indians at least for 150 years, Krishnamacharya, and even before that, had realized, and going back to the Mughal period, even before the British period, that people coming out of an Abrahamic religious traditions, coming out of the Abrahamic religious traditions, really did not have the samskaric abilities to understand what deities were, and to understand what Krishna, Rama, who they were. So they thought deities are graven images. They are the second commandment, thou shalt not worship, the graven images. So this was the aspect of Hinduism that created an absolute, clash of theisms, of ways of pursuing relationship with God theistically, was a non-negotiable clash. Westerners simply could not, whoever they were, whether they were missionaries, whether they were genuine Orientalist scholars that were sincerely trying, they had no interest or appreciation and nothing but
or even atheists,
nothing but deprecation for the deities and for these forms that Hindus believe, in the same way as Christians believe Christ is a historical, the Son of God, God made flesh. So Hindus believe that these forms are actual incarnations. They're actually forms that enter into the world, and that they can also manifest through deities and so forth. This aspect of Hinduism never could find a dialogue partner with any Western mode of thinking, be it, and even today, scientific, right? Add science on top of colonialism, on top of missionary. So that's always been an aspect of Hinduism that has been sort of relegated to private space, but for that reason, not because there's any secrecy about it or personal. I mean, the Hindu temples are huge public affairs.
Of course.
So I don't know how that conversation is going to take place. Still, you see that, although I think now we're much more open than, the Westerners are much more open to consider. Well, maybe let's hear about these deities on their own terms. Let's hear about what these traditions. So maybe the cultural climate, the intellectual climate in the West, or the countercultural climate, has come to a point where sort of people can open up a little bit more to bhakti on its own terms.
What so that Indian bhakti quality, but also it can also be that it's just a matter of education, that you're learning about these deities and all, and you don't necessarily have to prescribe to them or bow down or salute to them, but just learn about it. It's like speaking another language or something.
Yes.
And perhaps this is what Guruji and the Krishnamacharya lineage, that they were just being respectful, that I don't know where you might come from, so I don't want to, talk about the things that are maybe my language, and they might not be your language, but let's come to a common language where we can start at least a dialogue without scaring you away, without trying to have you think that I'm trying to convert you to believe in my deity, because that's not really what it's about.
Right, exactly that. So we now, I think, have a cultural climate where we're much more able to have that, because we realize the problems with our own Christian histories and missionizing.
Or maybe not. Maybe they're, somebody can be completely happy in their Catholic upbringing and be okay with seeing, learning about other deities.
Sure. No, I didn't mean that. What I meant was we're aware of the sort of violence that our Christian missionaries have done to other parts of the world. We might be completely content in a Christian worldview, but we're beginning to realize some of the damage that's been done in the name of Christ, right? Number one, and colonialism with all its colonialism with its power, with its material power, and missionaries which are jumping on the back of colonialism and exerting sort of religious power. All of that's been deconstructed, all of that's been analyzed. We're much more aware of our own limitations, our own context, our own historical location. And therefore, we're much more open to other paradigms and other cultures, and especially since Westernization and consumer culture has spread so massively, and we've damaged, we've inflicted so much damage on other cultures. So now we're much more ready, I think. We see that as well. So we're more ready to have these conversations as equal partners. Therefore, we're less resistant to, it doesn't mean we have to convert or anything like that. Right. Of course, that's not the issue. But just to have just to let the other tell its own story.
But also, I think to an uneducated person, that might be the issue, that there's fear of being converted without them knowing it, like in a cultish kind of environment. Because I actually had one student like that the one time asked me, they said, what is this Om and what is this chanting? Like, this is not, it was a very, orthodox person that, was kind of afraid of what it, if you have any idols, then I can't come and even take a yoga class in your studio.
Yeah.
So, and
that's all still there.
Out of respect, sometimes if I have a little statue,
Sure.
I take it down for them because,
Okay.
I don't want that to be an issue.
Right.
It's not, it shouldn't really be an issue.
Of course.
You can still do the postures.
Of course. So all of this is there. All of these different cultural, religious fears and samskaras and all of this is there.
Part of the path,
but nonetheless, it seems like we're at a moment now where we're much more open than we've been in the past. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
I think that's it.
Okay. If you got something out of asana, out of the postures, if it transformed your physical way of being, your alignment, your sense of feeling good in your body, if you got something out of that, and you have some faith in that, then consider the possibility, if that's only 1%, what else might there be? There's no need to jump it blindly, into some esoteric, just because it came from the East, just because it's written in Sanskrit. There's absolutely no reason for people to have faith in that. Why should they? Why should they suddenly have developed faith in some ancient tradition written in some strange language? But if they got something out of the first 1%, surely then that might then sort of create some space for the mind to consider, well, maybe let's see what else is being offered in this thing called yoga.